Okay. So, in the last video, we've gone over typically what is HTTP for. It's meant to basically it's meant for two different systems to communicate with each other. We're trying to go to now. We'll try to understand what is the terminology, right? So, there are a few terms in HTTP that we want to understand, so that whenever you're talking to another engineer, they know what you're talking about, so that you have a common terminology that you can exchange so that you both are on the same page, right? So there are a few things called one is connection, a message, request, response, a resource, entity, client, user agent, server, origin server, proxy, gateway, tunnel, cache. So you don't have to understand these three or yeah, these four as of now, but we'll still go over them. These are a bit different, but yeah. So a connection is basically a virtual circuit, a transport level virtual circuit that's established between two application programs. So if you look at here, right? So if you see here, there's this transport layer, right? So there are different applications that talk to each other. So what happens is that you want a circuit. So a connection is like a representation or a virtual circuit that gets established between two application programs. You can assume that it's like a wire meant for only communication between two people, like in the olden days, right? You had a telephone wire that a you had to establish a connection between two different telephones so that you can communicate with this which each with each other. So that's the crux of this. And a message, right? So when you're trying to communicate between two particular systems, the only way to communicate is you need to have some unit of measure or unit some unit, right? So here in HTTP we call this unit as a message. So basically it's like these are like octet streams, right? These are like octets having some syntax. So you can look at this, we'll go over this, but basically you know what, uh, a HTTP message, right? It consists of a request from client to server and server to client, and response from client to server. It can be anything, but yeah. So we'll go over this once we are into this, but I don't want to go into this into detail right now. So yeah, there is a request. Basically, request is something that comes in from your own client and it reaches the server, right? We don't want to dig into deeper right now. Then there's response and there's resource, as we mentioned, right? This each particular object that you want to get, right? It's a resource. Now comes entity. So a particular representation or rendition of data source or reply from a service resource that may be enclosed within a request or response. Entity concerned when in so particular representation of data resource in or reply of from a certain. So it typically is like, this is like in a request or a response message, an entity consists of metadata, while informs it's this typically a metadata. It's like how do you want to represent this resource? It is nothing but a representation of resource is called an entity. And this entity also contains metadata in form of entity headers, right? And then this client which establishes the connection with the server for the purpose of getting and sending requests. User agent, a client which initiates the request, right? So you can say that the browsers, if I go to any browser, right, and if I try to see any of the network requests, let's say, let me just refresh this page, right? So what happens is if you look at here and if I go to the headers, you'll be able to find something called user agent. Let's see this connection. You see here, right? So there is something called user agent. So basically what it is meant is to understand like who has initiated the request. So often browsers edited spiders. Spiders are like bots which are meant to index websites. Uh, but yeah, it's like a client which initiates the request. Client here, then this client, right, is the actual software or the website, the web application that is making the request to the backend server. Okay, and the server is a program that it's a typical application that runs on a different server altogether, and it accepts the request that you're sending to it, right? An origin server is like, given the resource that it resides, right, the server on which the resource resides or is to be created. For example, if I'm going to hit a request to facebook.com saying that, hey Facebook, take my image and store it in your database, that means the origin server of this resource is termed as the origin server. So basically, the place where I want to store my resource is basically called the origin server. It does not mean that the origin of the request is the origin server, but the place where the resource is actually residing is the origin server. And then there's proxy. I think we'll connect. Let's do it in another video because this has gone beyond it. Thank you.